Emma Evans watched the crimson sunset bleed across the Wyoming sky, clutching her handkerchief to her mouth as another cough racked her frail body. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston to Snake River with hope in her heart, only to find despair waiting at the end of the dusty trail. It was 1878, and consumption was a death sentence whispered in hushed tones. The disease that had claimed her parents 3 months prior had now taken root in her lungs, sending her west on a desperate journey for the dry air that doctors claimed might save her life. The wagon rolled to a stop at the edge of town, and Emma could feel the driver's unease growing with each passing moment. "This is as far as I go, miss," said the driver, a grizzled man named Porter who had been kind enough during their 3-day journey from the train station in Cheyenne. Now, however, his kindness had reached its limit. "Town's just up ahead. Best of luck to you." Emma gathered her single trunk and medical supplies, her savings hidden in a pouch beneath her petticoats. Her gloved hands trembled slightly as she paid the driver. "Thank you, Mr. Porter," she said, her voice barely audible above the wind sweeping across the open plain. Porter tipped his hat, his eyes never meeting hers, before turning his wagon around and disappearing back into the endless Wyoming landscape. Emma stood alone with her belongings, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Snake River lay just ahead, a collection of wooden buildings and lamplight promising shelter from the approaching night. Her chest tightened, the familiar pressure building until she doubled over in another fit of coughing. When the spasm passed, she straightened her back, wiped her mouth, and began the slow walk toward town, dragging her trunk through the dirt. The journey had exhausted her already limited strength, but Emma Evans had not come this far to die on the outskirts of Snake River. The saloon was the first building she encountered, piano music and raucous laughter spilling into the night. Emma avoided it, heading instead toward a building with a sign advertising rooms for rent. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house stood 2 stories tall, with a neat porch and curtained windows glowing warmly in the gathering darkness. Emma climbed the steps and knocked, her heart pounding with trepidation and hope. The door opened to reveal a plump woman with graying hair pulled into a severe bun. "Good evening," Emma began, summoning her most proper Boston accent. "I'm in need of lodging." "I've just arrived in town," and her words were cut short by another violent cough. She quickly pressed her handkerchief to her lips, but not before the woman's eyes widened in recognition and fear. "You're sick," Mrs. Holloway stated flatly, stepping back. "It's consumption," Emma admitted, knowing lies would only delay the inevitable. "I've come west for the cure. The doctors in Boston said there's no cure," Mrs. Holloway interrupted, her voice hardening as she moved to close the door. "And I'll not have it in my house. Try somewhere else, miss." The door closed with a finality that left Emma standing alone once more, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. But she would not surrender to despair, not yet. She continued down the main street, approaching the Snake River Hotel with renewed determination, yet the result was the same. As was her reception at the doctor's house, where she had hoped at least for professional compassion. By the 3rd rejection, word had begun to spread through the small town, and people crossed the street to avoid her path. In their eyes, Emma Evans was not a human being in need, but a walking embodiment of death itself. Night had fully descended by the time she reached the town church, her last hope for shelter. The reverend, a tall man with a gaunt face, listened to her plea from a careful distance before shaking his head. "I'm sorry, child," he said, though his eyes held more fear than compassion. "The congregation would never stand for it. Consumption has taken too many of our own. We cannot risk more." "Please," Emma whispered, her voice breaking, "I have nowhere else to go." "There's an abandoned trapper's cabin about a mile north of town," the reverend offered, pointing to a barely visible trail. "You might find shelter there, but it's rough living. I'll send what supplies I can spare tomorrow." Emma nodded, too exhausted for further protest. She turned away, dragging her trunk along the dirt road leading out of town. The weight of rejection pressed heavier on her chest than the disease itself. She had traveled so far, spent nearly everything she had, only to be cast out like a leper. Her strength was failing when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Emma stepped aside, assuming it was just another townsperson heading home. Instead, the rider slowed his horse to match her pace. "Madam," came a deep voice from above, "you shouldn't be out here alone at night." Emma looked up to see a man silhouetted against the star-filled sky. He sat tall on a chestnut stallion, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "I have little choice in the matter," she replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Snake River has made it clear I'm not welcome within its boundaries." The rider dismounted in a fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle. As he approached, the moonlight revealed a face weathered by sun and wind, yet youthful still, perhaps 30 years to her 22. His eyes, a startling blue even in the darkness, regarded her with neither fear nor disgust, but with simple curiosity. "I'm Ethan James," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of courtesy that felt like a balm to Emma's wounded spirit. "Ranch foreman at the Double Bar, just north of here. Mind if I ask what's got the good people of Snake River so riled up they'd send a lady out alone at night?" Another cough seized Emma before she could answer, this one so violent she had to lean against her trunk for support. When it passed, she looked up to find Ethan James still standing there, watching her with concern rather than revulsion. "Consumption," she said plainly, waiting for him to mount his horse and ride away. Instead, he nodded slowly. "My ma had it, took her 3 years back." He looked toward the town, then back at the lonely trail ahead of her. "Reverend tell you about the old McCarthy cabin?" "Yes," Emma replied, surprised by his calm reaction, "though I fear I won't reach it tonight, my strength." "It's no place for anyone, let alone someone ill," Ethan said decisively. "Look, I've got a lined shack about half a mile from here. It ain't much, but it's clean and dry. You can stay there while you sort things out." Emma stared at him, disbelieving. "Mr. James, you don't understand. I have consumption. It's contagious." Ethan smiled, a quirk of his lips that transformed his serious face. "Madam, I spent 3 years caring for my mother. If I was going to catch it, I reckon I would have by now." He gestured to her trunk. "May I?" Without waiting for her answer, he lifted the heavy trunk as if it weighed nothing and secured it to his horse. Then he turned back to her, extending his hand. "The town turned you away for being sick," he said simply. "I reckon I'll stay outside with you then." Emma hesitated, studying the outstretched hand of this stranger. In Boston, she would never consider accepting such an offer. But this wasn't Boston, and she was no longer the sheltered daughter of a successful merchant. She was a sick woman alone in a harsh land that had already rejected her. "Thank you, Mr. James," she said, placing her gloved hand in his. Ethan helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. As they rode away from Snake River, Emma felt the warmth of his presence at her back and allowed herself, for the first time since her diagnosis, a fragile flicker of hope. The lined shack appeared as a dark shadow against the night sky, a simple one-room structure with a small corral beside it. Ethan guided his horse, Thunder, toward it with the confidence of a man who knew his way even in darkness. "It's not much," he said as they approached, "but it keeps the weather out." Emma was too exhausted to respond, focusing instead on staying upright in the saddle. The journey from town, though short, had drained what little strength remained in her body. When they reached the shack, Ethan dismounted first, then gently helped her down. Her legs buckled beneath her, and he caught her with strong hands. "Easy now," he murmured, supporting her weight as if she were made of porcelain. Inside, the shack was spare but tidy. A narrow bed occupied one wall, a small table with 2 chairs stood in the center, and a stone fireplace dominated the opposite wall. A few shelves held basic supplies, and a trunk similar to her own sat at the foot of the bed. "This is where you live?" Emma asked, surprised by the modest accommodations for a ranch foreman. "Just when I'm working this section of the range," Ethan explained, easing her onto one of the chairs. "My proper quarters are back at the main ranch, but that's a good 3 hours' ride from here." He moved with efficient ease, lighting a lamp and stoking the banked embers in the fireplace until they flared to life. The sudden warmth made Emma realize how cold she had become, and she shivered despite herself. "You need dry clothes and something warm in your belly," Ethan stated, retrieving her trunk from outside. "I'll step out while you change." There's a nightshirt of mine hanging behind the door if you've nothing suitable. Before Emma could protest, he had slipped outside, leaving her alone in the small, warm space. She looked around, taking in the simple cleanliness of the place. Unlike the ornate furnishings of her Boston home, everything here served a purpose. There were no decorative figurines or lace doilies, just the essential elements of a working man's shelter. With trembling fingers, Emma unpinned her hat and removed her travel-stained jacket. Her dress, once a fashionable blue wool, was now dusty and wrinkled from the long journey. She had packed her clothing with care, but now found herself reaching for the offered nightshirt rather than her own things. It was soft from many washings, and when she slipped it over her head, it enveloped her in a scent of soap and open air. "May I come in?" Ethan called after a respectful interval. "Yes, thank you," Emma replied, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders over the too large nightshirt. Ethan entered with an armful of wood and a canteen. He added logs to the fire before filling a battered coffee pot with water and setting it to heat. "I don't have much in the way of food here," he said, rummaging through a small cabinet. "Some jerky, beans, and coffee. I can ride to the main ranch tomorrow for better supplies." "This is more than generous already, Mr. James," Emma said, watching him move about the small space. "I couldn't possibly impose further." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious. "Miss Evans," she supplied. "Emma Evans." "Miss Evans, I'm not one for flowery words, but where I come from, we don't leave folks to fend for themselves when they're in need. Especially not a lady." He poured hot water into a mug and added a spoonful of coffee grounds. "You're welcome to stay here as long as necessary." Emma accepted the offered mug, letting the warmth seep into her cold hands. "And where will you stay, Mr. James?" "I've got my bedroll," he said, gesturing to a rolled bundle near the door. "I'll sleep by the fire. Come morning, we can figure out something more permanent." The casual way he included her in his future plans struck Emma deeply. Her own family had wept and prayed when she was diagnosed, but they had also sequestered her in a separate wing of the house, servants leaving meals at her door. Here was a stranger offering her shelter without hesitation, without fear. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, unable to contain the question any longer. Ethan paused in his tasks, considering her question with the same thoughtful care he seemed to give everything. "When my ma got sick," he said slowly, "folks were afraid. They stopped coming around, stopped speaking to us in town. Pa had died years before, so it was just me and her. I watched her waste away, but what hurt her most wasn't the coughing or the pain, it was the loneliness." His eyes met Emma's, clear and direct. No one should have to face that kind of illness alone. A lump formed in Emma's throat that had nothing to do with her disease. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan nodded once, as if the matter was settled, and returned to preparing a simple meal. They ate in companionable silence, Emma managing only a few bites of the jerky and beans before exhaustion overwhelmed her. "Take the bed," Ethan said, noticing her drooping eyelids. "You need proper rest." Too weary to argue, Emma crawled beneath the rough blankets on the narrow bed. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Ethan moving quietly about the cabin, the soft sounds of his presence oddly comforting in this strange place so far from home. "Mr. James," she murmured, already half asleep. "Yes, Miss Evans." "I believe I was meant to find that abandoned cabin on my own tonight. Providence had other plans, it seems." She thought she heard a soft chuckle before sleep claimed her completely. "Seems that way, Miss Evans. Sleep well." Morning came with a brightness that penetrated even closed eyelids. Emma woke disoriented, the unfamiliar ceiling above her causing a moment of panic before the events of the previous night came rushing back. She sat up carefully, expecting the usual tightness in her chest, and was pleasantly surprised when her first breath came easier than it had in weeks. The cabin was empty, but a cup of water sat on the small table beside a note written in a surprisingly elegant hand. "Gone to fetch supplies. Back by noon. Rest easy. EJ." Emma rose slowly, testing her strength. The sleep had revived her somewhat, though she knew from experience that such reprieves were often temporary. She found her trunk open beside the bed, her personal items arranged neatly atop it, her hairbrush, a small mirror, and the leather case containing her medicines. After washing her face with water from the basin Ethan had left for her, Emma changed into one of her simpler dresses, a practical cotton garment in soft gray. She had just finished pinning up her chestnut hair when another coughing fit seized her, leaving her breathless and trembling. The copper taste of blood filled her mouth, and when she looked at her handkerchief, fresh crimson stains marred the white fabric. Emma sank onto the edge of the bed, fighting the despair that threatened to overwhelm her. The western air hadn't miraculously cured her, despite her desperate hopes. A noise outside drew her attention, and she quickly tucked the handkerchief away, composing herself as best she could. The door opened to reveal Ethan, his arms laden with supplies. "You're up," he said, his tone pleased. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," Emma lied, summoning a smile. "The rest was exactly what I needed." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he could see through her brave facade, but he didn't challenge her. Instead, he began unpacking the supplies: fresh bread, cheese, dried apples, bacon, and several bottles of medicine. "Doc Sanders at the main ranch sent these," he explained, setting the bottles on the table. "Said they might help with the symptoms, though he's honest enough to admit they're not a cure." Emma examined the bottles: laudanum for pain, a tonic for strength, and a herbal mixture she wasn't familiar with. "This is very kind, but I couldn't possibly accept it's already done," Ethan interrupted gently. "Boss approved it all, said to tell you the double bar takes care of its own." "But I'm not one of its own," Emma protested. Ethan smiled, that same transformative expression she'd glimpsed the night before. "You are now, Miss Evans, at least until you're well enough to decide what you want to do next." The simple acceptance in his words struck Emma speechless. Since her diagnosis, she had been defined by her illness: a patient, a burden, a danger to others. Ethan and these unseen people at the double bar were offering her something she hadn't realized she was missing: the dignity of being treated as a person first, a sick person second. "Now then," Ethan continued, oblivious to the emotional impact of his words, "I thought we might have a proper breakfast. Then, if you're feeling up to it, I can show you around a bit. The view from the ridge behind the shack is worth seeing." Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. As Ethan busied himself with breakfast preparations, she discreetly wiped away a tear. For the first time since the doctor in Boston had delivered his grim diagnosis, someone was talking to her about the future as if she had one. Breakfast was the best meal Emma had eaten in months. Ethan proved to be a competent cook, frying bacon and making johnnycakes that he served with butter and honey. Emma surprised herself by eating heartily, her appetite returning under the simple pleasure of shared company and good food. "Where did you learn to cook?" she asked as Ethan poured her a second cup of coffee. "Necessity," he replied with a shrug. "Been on my own since I was 16, save for the years I cared for Ma. You either learn to cook or you eat poorly." "And what brought you to Wyoming?" Ethan considered the question, absently running a thumb along the rim of his coffee mug. "Freedom, I suppose. After the war, Virginia didn't feel like home anymore. Too many ghosts. I headed west with not much more than the clothes on my back and thunder. Worked my way across the country until I landed at the double bar 5 years ago." "You fought in the war?" Emma asked, trying to calculate his age. "Joined up at 17, right at the end," Ethan confirmed. "Saw just enough to know I never wanted to see more." He changed the subject with a deliberate lightness. "What about you, Miss Evans? What brings a Boston lady all the way to Snake River, Wyoming?" Emma set down her cup, considering how much to share. There was something about Ethan James that invited honesty, a directness in his gaze that made pretense seem pointless. "After my parents died of consumption last winter, I developed symptoms myself," she began, her voice steady despite the painful memories. "The doctors in Boston gave me 6 months at most, but suggested the dry mountain air might prolong my life, possibly even cure the disease." She smiled wryly. They neglected to mention how unwelcome consumptives would be, even in a place of supposed healing. Ethan's expression darkened. "The town's reaction was shameful, no matter their fears. Fear makes people cruel," Emma said without rancor. "I've seen it happen to others, I just never expected to experience it myself." "Still doesn't make it right," Ethan insisted. He stood and began clearing the dishes. "Are you still up for that walk? The air's clean out here, might do you good." Emma nodded, grateful for his understanding and his ability to move forward without dwelling on injustices that couldn't be changed. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and they stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The line shack sat on a gentle slope, with rolling grasslands extending in all directions. To the east, Snake River was visible as a collection of buildings nestled in a valley. To the west, mountains rose in majestic, snow-capped splendor. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, the vastness of the landscape making her feel both insignificant and somehow free. "Different from Boston, I expect," Ethan commented, guiding her toward a well-worn path that led behind the shack. "In every possible way," she agreed. "Boston is all buildings and people and noise. This." She gestured to the open space around them. "This is like standing in the palm of God's hand." Ethan looked at her with new appreciation. "That's exactly it. Never heard it put quite that way before." They walked slowly, Ethan matching his pace to Emma's more labored one. He pointed out landmarks, the distant buildings of the main ranch to the north, the winding ribbon of the actual Snake River to the south, and the trails that connected these isolated outposts of civilization. When they reached the ridge, Emma gasped at the vista before her. A vast valley stretched below, painted in shades of green and gold, with the silver thread of a stream cutting through its heart. "Worth the climb?" Ethan asked, watching her face. "Oh yes," Emma whispered, drinking in the beauty before her. "I've never seen anything like it." They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, the Wyoming wind playing with Emma's carefully pinned hair. Eventually, she felt the familiar tightness building in her chest and knew she needed to return to the cabin before another episode overtook her. "We should head back," she said reluctantly. Ethan nodded, offering his arm for support on the return journey. Emma took it gratefully, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her gloved hand. They had almost reached the shack when the coughing began, violent and uncontrollable. Ethan's arm went around her waist, supporting her as her legs threatened to give way. When the spasm passed, Emma found herself virtually carried into the cabin and gently deposited on the bed. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, embarrassed by her weakness and the blood-flecked handkerchief she couldn't hide. "No apologies needed," Ethan said firmly, pouring her a glass of water. "Rest now. I've got chores to tend to, but I'll be close by if you need anything." Emma nodded, too drained to speak further. She watched through half-closed eyes as Ethan moved efficiently about the cabin, banking the fire and gathering tools before stepping outside. The last thing she saw before drifting into an exhausted sleep was his concerned face looking back at her from the doorway. The next few days established a pattern. Emma would wake feeling relatively strong, able to share breakfast and conversation with Ethan. By midday, her energy would fade, and the afternoon would be spent resting while Ethan tended to his ranch duties. Evenings were quiet affairs of simple meals and occasional reading. Ethan had a small collection of books that surprised Emma with their variety, from practical manuals on animal husbandry to volumes of Tennyson and Whitman. On the fourth day, Emma awoke to find a small vase of wildflowers on the table beside her bed. The simple gesture brought tears to her eyes. How long had it been since someone had thought to bring her flowers? "They're beautiful," she said when Ethan returned from his morning chores. "Thought they might brighten the place up a bit," he replied, a hint of color touching his tan cheeks. "Cabin's probably getting tiresome to look at." "Not at all," Emma assured him. "It feels more like home than anywhere I've been in a long time." The words slipped out without thought, but once spoken, she realized their truth. Despite its simplicity, or perhaps because of it, the line shack had become a sanctuary. And Ethan, this quiet cowboy with his thoughtful ways and steadfast presence, had become more than just a charitable stranger. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Emma found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Don't you worry about your job. Surely your employer can't approve of you spending so much time away from your duties." Ethan looked up from the bridle he was mending. "Mr. Garrett's a fair man. I rode to the main ranch yesterday while you were resting to check in. He's arranged for young Billy Thompson to cover most of my duties for now." "For how long?" Emma pressed. Ethan set his work aside, meeting her gaze directly. For as long as needed, Miss Evans. The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither was ready to voice. Emma looked away first, her heart beating with a rhythm that had nothing to do with her illness. "I've been thinking," Ethan continued when the silence grew too heavy. "The McCarthy cabin the Reverend mentioned, it's not much, but it's closer to town than this place. Might be easier for you to get supplies and such. I could fix it up, make it proper habitable. Are you trying to be rid of me, Mr. James?" Emma asked, attempting lightness despite the sudden tightness in her throat. "No, madam," Ethan replied seriously. "Just trying to think what's best for you. This shack is fine for a cowhand, but a lady like yourself deserves better." Emma considered his words, understanding the consideration behind them. "While I appreciate the thought, I'm quite comfortable here, unless," she hesitated, a new worry surfacing, "unless my presence is becoming a burden to you." "Never that," Ethan said quickly, almost vehemently. He ran a hand through his sandy hair, a gesture Emma had come to recognize as a sign of internal struggle. "Truth is, I've grown accustomed to the company. It's been a long while since I've had someone to talk with at day's end." The admission, simple as it was, warmed Emma more than the fire before them. "Then perhaps we might continue as we are, at least for now. I find I've grown accustomed to the company as well." Ethan's smile was all the answer she needed. They returned to their quiet activities, Emma with her mending, Ethan with his bridal, but something had shifted between them, a mutual acknowledgement that whatever this arrangement was, it had become important to them both. The week stretched into 2, and Emma found herself settling into a life she had never imagined. Her health remained precarious, with good days followed by bad, but even on the worst days, Ethan's presence made the suffering bearable. He never flinched from her illness, never showed disgust at the blood-stained handkerchiefs or the racking coughs that sometimes left her too weak to rise. Instead, he brought her books to read, told her stories of the ranch and its characters, and on one memorable occasion, carried her outside wrapped in blankets so she could see the sunset when she'd been bedbound for 3 days straight. It was after one such kindness, Ethan had ridden all the way to town to fetch a special herbal tea the Chinese laundry owner recommended for lung ailments, that Emma realized the dangerous direction of her heart. "You shouldn't have gone to such trouble," she protested as he prepared the fragrant brew. "Wasn't any trouble," Ethan replied, his back to her as he worked. "Besides, Mr. Wang swears by this stuff, says his grandfather lived to 95 drinking it daily." Emma watched him, this man who had appended his life to care for a dying stranger. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms tanned and muscled from years of hard work. His movements were efficient yet gentle, the same careful attention he gave to everything from mending tack to tending her when she was at her weakest. "Ethan," she said softly, using his given name for the first time. He turned, surprise and something warmer flickering in his eyes at the intimacy. "I don't know how to thank you properly," Emma continued, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "What you've done, what you continue to do, it's beyond kindness." Ethan set the cup down and crossed to where she sat bundled in a chair by the fire. He crouched before her, bringing their eyes level. "Emma," he replied, returning the familiarity, "you don't need to thank me. I'm not doing this out of duty or pity." He paused, seeming to search for words, a man more accustomed to action than declaration. "These past weeks, having you here. It's brought something into my life I didn't know was missing." Emma's breath caught, and not from her illness. "Ethan, but whatever she might have said was lost as the door burst open, admitting a gust of cold air and a young cowboy Emma had never seen before. "Ethan." "Sorry to bust in, but there's trouble," the newcomer blurted, his words tumbling over one another in haste. "Rustlers hit the north pasture. Mr. Garrett sent me to fetch you. Says they're heading toward the border and we need every man who can ride." Ethan stood, his expression shifting from tender to determined in an instant. "How many head?" 20, maybe 30. "They've got a 3-hour head start." Ethan nodded, already reaching for his gun belt and coat. He turned to Emma, conflict clear on his face. "Go," she said before he could speak. "I'll be fine." I don't want to leave you, he said quietly, ignoring the impatient shifting of the young cowboy by the door. Emma summoned a reassuring smile. You have a duty to your employer. I understand that better than most. Ethan hesitated a moment longer, then nodded decisively. Billy, ride ahead. Tell Mr. Garrett I'm coming right behind you. When the young man had gone, Ethan knelt briefly beside Emma's chair. I'll be back as soon as I can. There's food prepared in the larder and your medicines are laid out on the shelf. If you need anything, Mrs. Cartwright at the nearest homestead knows you're here. Just fire 3 shots if there's trouble. Emma nodded, touched by his thoroughness even in haste. Be careful, Ethan. He stood, hesitated, then in a move that seemed to surprise them both, bent and pressed a swift, gentle kiss to her forehead. I will, he promised, and then he was gone. The door closing firmly behind him, Emma sat frozen, her hand rising to touch the spot where his lips had brushed her skin. The gesture had been so natural, so unplanned, yet it confirmed what she had begun to suspect. Ethan James cared for her as more than just a charitable project or a friend in need. And God help her, she cared for him too far more than was wise for a woman whose future could be measured in months rather than years. The rustlers proved more determined than expected. One day stretched into 3, and Emma found herself alone in the lined shack, her thoughts circling between worry for Ethan and anxiety about her own feelings. She kept busy as best she could, reading his books, tidying the already neat cabin, and on better days, sitting outside to enjoy the early summer sunshine. On the 4th day, as dusk approached, Emma heard hoofbeats approaching and rushed to the door, her heart lifting at the thought of Ethan's return. But it wasn't Ethan who dismounted before the cabin, it was the young cowboy Billy, his expression grim. Miss Evans, he said, removing his hat. Mr. Garrett sent me to check on you and bring news. Emma's hand flew to her throat. Is Ethan? He's alive, Billy assured her quickly, seeing the fear in her face. But he's been shot. We caught up to the rustlers at the territorial line and there was a fight. Ethan took a bullet in the shoulder. Doc Sanders is with him at the main ranch, says he'll recover, but it'll be a while before he's riding again. Relief and fresh anxiety warred within Emma. Alive but wounded, the news was both better and worse than her darkest fears. I need to go to him, she said decisively, already turning back into the cabin to gather her things. Billy shifted uncomfortably. Miss, I don't think that's wise. The main ranch is a hard ride and with your condition. Emma straightened her back, summoning every ounce of the Boston society woman she had once been. Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your concern, but Ethan has spent weeks caring for me. I will not abandon him now that he needs care in return. If you won't take me, I shall find my own way. Billy recognized the steel beneath her gentle demeanor and nodded in surrender. Yes, madam, we can leave at first light. It's too dangerous to travel these trails in the dark. Emma agreed to the compromise, though the night stretched endlessly before her, each hour marked by worry and impatience. When morning finally arrived, she was ready, having packed only the essentials and fortified herself with the strongest dose of medicine she dared take. The journey to the main ranch was arduous, even with Billy leading the way on the gentlest horse he could find. By the time the buildings of the double bar came into view, Emma was clinging to the saddle, her lungs burning with each breath. A tall, silver-haired man emerged from the main house as they rode into the yard, his weathered face creasing in concern as he helped Emma dismount. Miss Evans, I presume, he said, his voice deep and resonant. I'm Gerald Garrett. We've been expecting you, though I must say I advised against this journey. How is he? Emma asked, ignoring the subtle reproach. Holding his own, Mr. Garrett replied, supporting her as they walked toward the house. Fever broke this morning, which is a good sign. Doc Sanders removed the bullet clean, says if infection doesn't set in, he should make a full recovery. Emma sagged with relief, and Mr. Garrett's arm tightened around her waist. Let's get you inside, young lady. You look about ready to collapse yourself. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly refined, with polished wood floors and comfortable furnishings that spoke of Eastern influence. Mrs. Garrett, a handsome woman with kind eyes, met them in the foyer. You must be Emma, she said warmly, taking Emma's hands in her own. Ethan has told us so much about you. Come, let me show you to his room. He's been asking for you since he regained consciousness." Emma followed, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in her eagerness to see Ethan. Mrs. Garrett led her to a door at the end of a hallway, knocking softly before opening it. "Ethan, dear, you have a visitor," she announced, stepping aside to allow Emma to enter. The room was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large window allowing afternoon light to spill across the bed where Ethan lay, his left shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale but alert. When he saw Emma, his eyes widened in surprise and something like joy. "Emma," he said, his voice rough but strong. "What are you doing here?" "Being where I belong," she replied simply, moving to his bedside. Mrs. Garrett discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind her. Emma sank into the chair beside the bed, suddenly aware of how the journey had taxed her strength. "You shouldn't have come," Ethan said, though his eyes never left her face. "The ride is too hard in your condition." "That's what everyone keeps telling me," Emma said with a small smile. "Yet here I am." Ethan's good hand reached for hers, his calloused fingers wrapping around her smaller ones. "I'm glad," he admitted. "I've been worried about you, alone out there." "Worried about me?" Emma laughed softly. "You're the one who was shot." "Hazard of the job," Ethan dismissed. "But you," he broke off as Emma was seized by a coughing fit, her body doubling over with the force of it. When it passed, she straightened to find Ethan struggling to sit up, concern etched on his features. "Lie back," she ordered, gently pushing him down. "You'll tear your stitches." "Emma," he said, his voice serious. "This isn't right. You shouldn't be caring for me. It should be the other way around." Emma held his gaze steadily. "Why? Because I'm a woman? Or because I'm ill? Either way, I'm perfectly capable of helping a friend in need." Ethan's expression softened. "Not because you're a woman, because you're fighting your own battle, and not as a friend, Emma." The words hung between them, full of meaning neither had dared express until now. Emma's heart raced, and for once it had nothing to do with her disease. "What then?" she asked softly. Ethan's fingers tightened around hers. "I think you know. I think you've known since before I left to chase those rustlers. I care for you, Emma Evans, more than I've cared for anyone since my ma passed, and it scares the hell out of me because I know what you're facing and I know how it ends." Tears filled Emma's eyes at his raw honesty. "Ethan, I can't offer you a future. It wouldn't be fair." "Life isn't fair," he countered. "If it was, you wouldn't be sick and I wouldn't have a hole in my shoulder, but here we are." His blue eyes held hers, unflinching. "I'm not asking for promises, Emma. I'm just telling you how things stand with me. What happens next is your decision." Emma looked at their joined hands, her pale fingers encased in his sun-darkened ones. She had come west seeking a miracle cure, and found instead something far more precious, a man who saw beyond her illness to the woman beneath, who offered not pity but partnership. "I care for you too," she whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. "More than I should. More than is sensible." Ethan's smile transformed his face despite the pallor of recovery. "Well then," he said, "I reckon we're both fools." Emma laughed, a genuine sound of joy that surprised them both. "Perhaps so, but if this is foolishness, I find I prefer it to wisdom." The moment was interrupted by another knock at the door. Mrs. Garrett entered with a tray of food and medicines. "I thought you both might need some sustenance," she said, her knowing smile suggesting she had guessed something of what had passed between them. "Emma, dear, we've prepared a room for you next door. You must rest after your journey." Emma thanked her, suddenly aware of how her strength had ebbed. After ensuring Ethan ate something and took his medicine, she allowed Mrs. Garrett to lead her to the adjacent room, where she collapsed onto the bed fully clothed and fell into the deepest sleep she had known in months. The next days at the double bar established a new routine. Emma's health improved somewhat with rest and Mrs. Garrett's excellent cooking, while Ethan gained strength daily. They spent hours together, talking as they never had before, not as caretaker and patient, but as a man and woman discovering each other's pasts, dreams, and beliefs. Emma learned of Ethan's childhood in Virginia, his difficult relationship with his stern father, and his adventures traveling west after the war. In turn, she shared stories of Boston society, her love of art and music, and her dreams of travel that had been cut short by her diagnosis. A week after her arrival, Emma sat beside Ethan on the ranch house porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. His arm, now free of bandages but still tender, rested lightly around her shoulders. "Doc Sanders says I can return to light duties next week," Ethan said, breaking the comfortable silence. "That's wonderful," Emma replied, though a part of her mourned the end of this interlude, where time seemed suspended and the future didn't press quite so heavily upon them. "I've been thinking," Ethan continued, his voice carefully neutral. "The line shack is no place for you, especially as winter approaches, but I can't abandon my position here. It's more than just a job to me." Emma tensed, wondering if this was a gentle prelude to parting ways. "I understand," she said, striving to keep disappointment from her voice. "I never expected you to give up your life for me, Ethan." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "That's not what I'm saying at all. I've spoken with Mr. Garrett. There's a small cottage on the ranch property, not far from the main house. It was built for the previous foreman's family but has stood empty since he moved on last year." He took a deep breath. "It could be ours, Emma, if you wanted, as husband and wife." Emma stared at him, speechless. Of all the possibilities she had considered, this had not been among them. "You're asking me to marry you," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am," Ethan confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know it's sudden. I know your health makes the future uncertain. But I'd rather have whatever time we're granted together than spend it apart out of fear of what's coming." Emma's mind whirled. Marriage had been part of her expectations in Boston, but those dreams had died with her diagnosis. To have them resurrected here, in this untamed land with this quiet, steady man, seemed almost too much to comprehend. "Ethan, you know what consumption does," she said, needing him to fully understand what he was proposing. "It's not a gentle decline. There will be pain and blood and days when I can't rise from bed. You've seen it with your mother. Can you truly wish to witness it again with a wife?" "I saw my mother die alone because people were afraid," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't let that happen to you, Emma. Whether we have months or years or some miracle that gives us decades, I want to spend that time with you. Not as your caretaker, but as your husband." Tears filled Emma's eyes, spilling over to track silently down her cheeks. "And if I can never give you children? If all I bring to this marriage is illness and eventual heartbreak," Ethan reached up to gently wipe away her tears. "Emma Evans, you've already given me more than I dared hope for. You've brought laughter back into my life and purpose beyond just work. As for children, well, life has its own plans, doesn't it? Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Emma looked out at the vast Wyoming landscape, the land that had first rejected her, and then, through Ethan, embraced her. She thought of her lonely journey west, driven by desperate hope for a cure that might never come. She had found something else instead, not healing for her body, perhaps, but certainly for her spirit. "Yes," she said, turning back to meet Ethan's gaze. "Yes, I will marry you, Ethan James." His smile was like the sunrise, gradual and then suddenly brilliant. He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips. "Are you sure?" he whispered, a final chance to reconsider. In answer, Emma closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that held all the promise her uncertain future could offer. It was gentle at first, then deeper as Ethan's good arm tightened around her, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both breathless for reasons that had nothing to do with illness or injury, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Emma Evans," he said, the words simple yet profound in the gathering twilight. "And I love you, Ethan James," she replied, knowing it was true, knowing also that love was both the most reckless and most sensible thing either of them could offer in the face of an uncertain future. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch house. Mrs. Garrett had insisted on making Emma a proper wedding dress, a lovely creation of cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mr. Garrett gave the bride away, and the ranch hands formed an enthusiastic, if somewhat rowdy audience. The Reverend from Snake River performed the ceremony, his initial reluctance overcome by Mr. Garrett's influence, and perhaps a touch of shame at his earlier treatment of Emma. Several townspeople attended as well, curiosity overcoming their fear when they saw the vibrant, smiling woman who bore little resemblance to the desperate figure they had turned away months before. "I, Emma, take you, Ethan, to be my lawfully wedded husband," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the emotion of the moment. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." The traditional words held special poignancy given their circumstances, but neither bride nor groom faltered. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan's kiss was both tender and possessive, a claim and a promise wrapped in a single gesture. The cottage Mr. Garrett had offered them exceeded Emma's expectations. Though small, it was solidly built, with 2 bedrooms, a cozy parlor, and a kitchen equipped with a modern iron stove. Windows faced east and west, allowing both sunrise and sunset to fill the rooms with light. A small garden plot waited for spring planting, and a covered porch provided shelter for enjoying summer evenings. "It's perfect," Emma breathed as Ethan carried her across the threshold on their wedding night. "It will be," he agreed, setting her gently on her feet and looking around at the space that would become their home. With time and work, they had discussed the physical aspects of marriage with frank openness. Emma's doctor in Boston had warned that pregnancy would likely be fatal in her condition, and Ethan had assured her they would take precautions. Yet as night deepened and they retired to the bedroom they would share, Emma found herself trembling with anticipation rather than fear. Ethan was as gentle and considerate in lovemaking as he was in all things, mindful of both her inexperience and her fragile health. What began as awkward tenderness blossomed into something profound, a physical expression of the bond that had grown between them since that first night outside Snake River. Afterward, lying in the circle of Ethan's arms, Emma felt a contentment she had never known. Her body might be failing her, but in this moment with this man she felt wholly alive. "Happy," Ethan murmured against her hair. "Beyond words," she replied truthfully. "I never thought to find this, Ethan, not after the diagnosis." His arms tightened around her. "We'll make every day count," he promised, however many were granted. As summer yielded to fall, Emma and Ethan settled into the rhythms of married life on the double bar. Ethan resumed his duties as foreman, while Emma made their cottage a home, filling it with simple comforts and the wildflowers Ethan still brought her regularly. Her health remained unpredictable some days, found her energetic enough to tend her small garden or visit with Mrs. Garrett, while others confined her to bed, each breath a painful struggle. Ethan bore the uncertainty with the same steady patience he brought to everything, never showing frustration on bad days or false optimism on good ones. Doc Sanders visited weekly, bringing new medicines to try and honest assessments of her condition. By late October, even Emma had to acknowledge that the disease was progressing, despite the dry mountain air and all their hopeful efforts. "Winter's coming," the doctor said during one visit, his kind eyes troubled. "The cold will be hard on your lungs, Mrs. James. You might consider wintering somewhere milder, Arizona, perhaps, or New Mexico." Emma exchanged a glance with Ethan, a silent communication that had become second nature. "This is our home, doctor," she said simply. "We'll weather the winter here together." The doctor nodded, respecting her decision even if he disagreed with it medically. After he left, Ethan held her close on the porch swing he had built for her, both of them watching the first snowflakes begin to fall. "We could go south," he offered, his breath forming clouds in the chilling air. "Mr. Garrett would understand. Billy's ready to step up as temporary foreman." Emma shook her head, nestling closer against his warmth. "No, Ethan. I've spent my life searching for the right place, Boston, then the West, and now here. I've found it. I've found home. I don't want to leave it, no matter what winter brings." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple, understanding in his silence. They both knew what winter might bring, beyond just snow and cold. They both chose to face it where they stood, in the home they had made together. As predicted, the cold weather exacerbated Emma's symptoms. By Christmas, she was spending most days indoors, conserving her strength for special occasions like the ranch's holiday celebration or quiet evenings with Ethan by the fire. Yet these were not sad days. Emma found a different kind of joy in the small pleasures of their shared life, Ethan reading aloud from Dickens in the evenings, Mrs. Garrett teaching her to make perfect biscuits on good days, the ranch hands stopping by with small gifts and stories to brighten her confinement. On Christmas Eve, Ethan surprised her with a piano, a small upright he and the ranch hands had hauled all the way from Cheyenne. "How did you know?" Emma gasped, running her fingers reverently over the keys. "You mentioned once that you played in Boston," Ethan said, pleased by her reaction. "Said it was what you missed most, besides your parents." Emma sat on the bench, picking out the opening notes of Silent Night with fingers that remembered despite months of disuse. Ethan watched, transfixed, as she played and then began to sing, her voice clear and sweet despite the damage to her lungs. When she finished, he was beside her on the bench, his eyes suspiciously bright. "That was beautiful, Emma, like having a piece of heaven right here in our home." She leaned against him, grateful beyond words for this man who understood what music meant to her soul. "Thank you, Ethan. This is the most wonderful gift." "Well, there's one more," he said, reaching into his pocket to produce a small velvet box. "It's not much," but Emma opened it to find a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Inside was a miniature photograph of the two of them on their wedding day, their faces alight with joy and promise. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, tears filling her eyes, "it's perfect." He fastened it around her neck, his fingers gentle against her skin. "Now I'll always be close to your heart," he said, "even when duties take me away." Emma turned to embrace him, overwhelmed by love for this man who had changed her life so completely. "You've always been there," she said against his chest. "From the moment you found me on that road outside of town." They celebrated Christmas with a small feast, joined by the Garretts and several of the ranch hands who had no family nearby. Emma played carols on her new piano, her cheeks flushed with pleasure despite the effort it cost her. It was, all agreed, the merriest Christmas the double bar had seen in years. January brought heavy snows and bitter cold. Emma's health declined further, each day a battle for breath that left her exhausted. Ethan took to sleeping in a chair by her bed, ready to help her sit up when the coughing fits came in the night. "You should sleep properly," Emma protested one evening, watching him arrange his makeshift bed. "You need rest too." "I rest better near you," Ethan replied, the simplicity of his words masking the depth of his devotion. "Now, would you like me to read more of David Copperfield before you sleep? These quiet routines sustain them through the darkest days of winter." Ethan balanced his duties at the ranch with care for Emma, never betraying the toll it took on him. Emma, in turn, fought to maintain her strength and spirits, determined not to become the burden she had feared being. February arrived with a week of clear, cold days that lifted Emma's spirits. She felt well enough to sit on the porch, bundled in blankets, watching Ethan work with the horses in the corral nearby. The sun on her face was a blessing after weeks of confinement, and she breathed as deeply as her damaged lungs allowed, savoring the crisp mountain air. "You look better today," Ethan observed that evening as they shared a simple supper. "I feel better," Emma agreed, though they both knew such improvements were often temporary. "Ethan, I've been thinking about something." He set down his fork, giving her his full attention. "What is it, love?" "When spring comes," she said carefully, "I want to visit Snake River, properly this time." Ethan's expression reflected surprise and concern. "Are you sure, after how they treated you?" Emma nodded. "I'm not angry anymore. I understand their fear, even if I don't condone their actions. And I'm curious to see the town that, in a roundabout way, brought us together." Ethan considered her request, his protective instincts warring with his desire to grant her wishes. "If you're strong enough when spring comes," he finally agreed, "we'll go together." The promise buoyed Emma through the remaining weeks of winter, giving her a goal to work toward. She practiced short walks around the cottage when weather permitted, played her piano to strengthen her lungs, and ate as heartily as she could manage to build her strength. By early April, when the first wildflowers began to appear and the snow retreated to the highest peaks, Emma felt ready to fulfill her wish. Ethan arranged for the ranch's most comfortable buggy, lined it with blankets and pillows, and on a mild Saturday morning, they set out for Snake River. The town had changed little in the months since Emma's first arrival, but her circumstances could not have been more different. Where once she had been a desperate stranger, now she was Mrs. Ethan James, wife of the respected double-bar foreman, arriving in a proper conveyance with her husband at her side. They stopped first at the general store, where the proprietor who had once refused to serve her now rushed to assist Mrs. James with her selections. Emma accepted his deference with gracious dignity, neither mentioning their previous encounter nor allowing it to affect her courteous manner. From there, they visited the dressmaker, the bank, and finally, at Emma's insistence, the church. The Reverend, who had at least offered the suggestion of the trapper's cabin on that first night, welcomed them warmly, his earlier fear apparently forgotten. "Will you be attending services tomorrow, Mrs. James?" he inquired as they prepared to leave. "We would be honored to have you join our congregation." Emma glanced at Ethan, who nodded his support. "Yes, Reverend, I believe we will," she replied. "Thank you for the invitation." As they walked back to the buggy, Ethan's arm protectively around her waist, Emma felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, forgiveness, and a deep appreciation for how life's darkest moments could lead to unexpected blessings. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, noting her thoughtful silence. Emma smiled up at him, her face thin but her eyes bright. "More than all right. I was just thinking about how strangely life unfolds. If Snake River had welcomed me with open arms that night, we might never have met." Ethan helped her into the buggy, tucking blankets around her against the cooling afternoon air. "Then I reckon I owe this town a debt," he said, settling beside her and taking up the reins. "Though I still can't approve of how they treated you, nor should you," Emma agreed. "But I've made my peace with it. And look what came of their rejection. I found you, and through you, a home and love I never expected to have." They attended church the next morning, causing quite a stir among the congregation. Many approached to introduce themselves, conveniently forgetting they had been among those who turned away the sick stranger less than a year before. Emma accepted their belated welcome with grace, her hand firmly clasped in Ethan's. After the service, as they prepared to return to the ranch, the Reverend approached with a small leather-bound book. "Mrs. James," he said, holding it out to her, "I wanted you to have this. It's a collection of devotional readings that many have found comforting in times of illness." Emma accepted the gift, recognizing it for what it was: an acknowledgement of past wrongs and an attempt at atonement. "Thank you, Reverend. That's very thoughtful." As they drove away from Snake River, Emma leaned against Ethan's shoulder, a sense of completion settling over her. She had confronted the place that had rejected her and found herself stronger for it, able to offer forgiveness without forgetting the lesson it had taught her about human nature, both its capacity for fear and cruelty, and its potential for growth and redemption. Spring unfurled across the Wyoming landscape with vivid intensity, as if nature were determined to make up for winter's bleakness with an abundance of color and life. Emma spent as much time outdoors as her strength permitted, supervising the planting of her garden and sitting on the porch to watch Ethan work with the young horses. Her health stabilized somewhat with the warmer weather, though Doc Sanders cautioned against too much optimism. "You're holding your own, Mrs. James," he told her during his regular visit in late May. "Which is more than I expected last winter, if I'm being honest. It's this place," Emma said, gesturing to the ranch beyond her window, "and Ethan, they give me reason to fight." The doctor nodded, understanding. He had seen it before patients who outlived all medical predictions through sheer force of will and love. "Whatever the reason, make the most of these good days," he advised, "and know that I'm never more than a cent rider away if things change." Emma took his advice to heart, embracing each day as the gift it was. She and Ethan picnicked by the creek that ran through the ranch property, rode in the buggy to visit neighboring homesteads, and spent long evenings on their porch, watching the spectacular Wyoming sunsets. On a perfect June afternoon, as they sat beneath the cottonwood tree behind their cottage, Emma broached a subject they had tacitly avoided. "Ethan," she began, her fingers absently pleating the fabric of her skirt. "I want to talk about, after." He tensed beside her, though his voice remained steady. "After what, love? After I'm gone," Emma said gently. "We both know it's coming sooner or later, probably sooner." Ethan started to protest, but Emma placed her fingers against his lips, silencing him. "Please, let me say this. It's important to me." He nodded reluctantly, taking her hand in his. "You've given me more joy in these months than I ever expected to find in a lifetime," Emma continued, her voice clear and calm. "You've made me a wife, a home, a place in this world when I thought all that was lost to me. I want you to know that I have no regrets, not about coming west, not about my illness, and certainly not about marrying you." Ethan's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but he remained silent, honoring her need to speak. "When I'm gone, I don't want you to retreat from life," Emma said firmly. "I want you to mourn, yes, but then to live fully and openly as you've taught me to do. Promise me you won't become bitter or isolated. Promise me you'll find happiness again." "Emma," Ethan's voice broke on her name. "I can't, you can," she insisted. "Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. Promise me, Ethan, it's the only thing I need from you now." He drew a deep, shuddering breath, his struggle visible on his face. "I promise," he finally whispered. "But not soon, Emma, don't ask that of me." She smiled, relief evident in her expression. "No, not soon, just someday." They sat in silence for a long while after that, the weight of what had been said and promised settling between them like the most solemn of vows. When Ethan finally spoke again, his voice was steady once more. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been waiting for the right moment." He pressed a small object into her palm, a wooden carving of a wildflower, so delicately rendered that Emma could make out individual petals. "It's beautiful," she breathed, turning it in her fingers to catch the light. "Did you make this?" Ethan nodded, a hint of shyness in his expression. "Been working on it evenings while you play the piano. It's a columbine, the first flower I brought you, remember?" Emma's heart swelled with love for this man who expressed his feelings not in grand gestures or flowery words, but in small, meaningful actions that showed the depth of his understanding. "I'll treasure it always," she promised, closing her fingers around the carving. Summer passed in a series of golden days, each one savored like the precious gift it was. Emma's garden flourished under her care, providing fresh vegetables for their table and flowers for the cottage. The piano became her daily companion, her playing growing stronger even as her body weakened. By August, however, even Emma had to acknowledge that her disease was advancing. The good days came less frequently, the bad ones lasted longer, and the copper taste of blood became a constant companion. On a warm evening, as they sat on their porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Emma turned to Ethan with a sudden intensity. "Dance with me," she said, the words both request and plea. Ethan looked surprised. "Here now?" "Yes," Emma nodded, "under the stars. We never had a proper wedding dance, you know." Without further question, Ethan rose and helped Emma to her feet. He drew her gently into his arms, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers as they began to sway to music only they could hear. Emma rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I wish we could stay like this forever," she whispered. Ethan's arms tightened around her, his cheek pressed against her hair. "So do I, love, so do I." They danced slowly in the Wyoming twilight, two figures moving as one beneath a canopy of emerging stars. It was a perfect moment, suspended outside of time and illness and fear, a memory being created that would sustain them both through whatever lay ahead. September brought cooler temperatures and a marked decline in Emma's condition. She fought valiantly, determined to see the brilliant colors of autumn that Ethan had described to her, but her body was failing despite her indomitable spirit. By the equinox, she was confined to bed, each breath a labored struggle. Ethan rarely left her side, delegating his duties to Billy and the other hands. Mr. and Mrs. Garrett visited daily, bringing comfort and practical help in equal measure. Doc Sanders moved into the ranch house to be close at hand. On a crisp morning when the aspen trees had just begun to turn gold, Emma woke from a restless sleep to find Ethan dozing in the chair beside her bed, his hand still clasping hers even in slumber. She studied his beloved face, memorizing every line and angle as if she could carry the image into whatever waited beyond this life. "Ethan," she called softly, reluctant to wake him yet needing to see his eyes once more. He stirred instantly, years of ranch life having made him alert to the slightest sound. "Emma, what is it, love? Do you need something?" She smiled, the effort visible. "Just you. Could you help me sit up? I want to see outside." Ethan carefully arranged pillows behind her, supporting her frail body as he adjusted her position. Then he opened the curtains wide, allowing the morning sunlight to flood the room and revealing the view of mountains and aspens beyond. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, drinking in the sight. "Exactly as you described it." Ethan sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders. "Next year, we'll have a picnic under those trees when they turn. You can play your portable music box and I'll read Whitman to you." They both knew it was a beautiful fiction, but Emma nodded as if making a date. "I'd like that very much." They sat together in the autumn sunlight, speaking of small, everyday things: the new colt in the stables, Mrs. Garrett's plans for Thanksgiving, the letter that had arrived from Emma's aunt in Boston. Ordinary conversations made extraordinary by the knowledge that they might be among their last. As the sun reached its zenith, Emma's breathing became more labored. Ethan rang the bell that would summon Doc Sanders, but Emma shook her head. "Not yet," she whispered. "Just hold me, Ethan. That's all I need now." He gathered her into his arms as carefully as if she were made of spun glass, her body so light it seemed hardly there at all. Emma rested her head against his shoulder, her eyes still fixed on the view beyond the window. "Do you remember," she asked, her voice barely audible, "what you said to me that first night, outside Snake River?" Ethan nodded, his throat too tight for speech. "The town turned you away for being sick," Emma recalled. "I reckon I'll stay outside with you then." Those words changed everything for me, Ethan. They gave me back my humanity when I needed it most. "You gave me far more in return," Ethan managed, his voice rough with emotion. Emma's hand found his, her fingers cold but her grip surprisingly strong. "We saved each other, I think." They sat in silence after that, words no longer necessary between them. The sun began its slow descent toward the western mountains, bathing the room in golden light that seemed to Emma almost tangible, as if she could reach out and touch it. "It's so beautiful," she whispered, though whether she meant the view or something only she could see, Ethan couldn't tell. "Yes," he agreed, holding her closer. "Yes, it is." Emma Evans James died as she had lived those final months in the arms of the man who had loved her beyond fear, beyond convention, beyond the limits of her illness. She slipped away with the setting sun, her face peaceful, her hand still clasped in Ethan's. The town of Snake River, which had once turned her away, turned out in full for her funeral. They laid her to rest on a gentle slope of the double bar, beneath a young aspen tree that Ethan had planted for her in the spring. The simple headstone read, "Emma Evans James, beloved wife, whose courage and grace transformed all who knew her." Ethan stood long at the graveside after the others had departed, Mr. Garrett's steady presence beside him the only thing keeping him upright. "She made me promise to live," Ethan said finally, his voice raw. "To find happiness again someday. I don't know if I can keep that promise, Gerald." Mr. Garrett placed a weathered hand on the younger man's shoulder. "Not today," he said, echoing Emma's own words. "Not tomorrow. But someday, son. And until then, you have a home here with us and work that needs doing and memories worth honoring." Ethan nodded, placing the wooden columbine he had carved for Emma atop her grave. "Someday," he agreed. The Wyoming winter came and went, harsh as always but somehow less bleak than Ethan had feared. He threw himself into his work, finding solace in physical exhaustion and the routine of ranch life. Evenings were the hardest, the empty cottage a constant reminder of what he had lost, but he honored Emma's memory by playing her piano, his untrained fingers picking out simple melodies that filled the silence. Spring arrived again, bringing with it the first anniversary of Emma's arrival at the double bar. Ethan marked the day by riding to the ridge where they had first looked out over the valley together. He spent hours there, sometimes talking aloud to her as if she could hear, sometimes sitting in silence with his memories. As he prepared to leave, he noticed a patch of wildflowers growing nearby columbines, their delicate purple blossoms nodding in the breeze. Ethan smiled, his first genuine smile in months. "I see you, Emma," he said softly to the empty air. "I'll always see you." He returned to the ranch with a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, when Mrs. Garrett invited him to Sunday dinner, he accepted for the first time since Emma's passing. The following week, he agreed to accompany Mr. Garrett to Cheyenne on ranch business. Small steps back toward the land of the living, each one honoring the promise he had made to his wife. 2 years after Emma's death, Ethan was approached by Mr. Garrett with an unexpected proposition. "I'm getting too old for this, son," the rancher said as they sat in his office reviewing breeding records. "Been thinking of stepping back, letting someone younger take the reins." Ethan looked up sharply. "You're not selling the double bar, Lord, no," Mr. Garrett chuckled. "This land will stay in the family, but I need someone to run it day to day, someone who knows every inch of this ranch and loves it like their own." He fixed Ethan with a meaningful gaze. "Someone like you." The offer stunned Ethan. "Me, as ranch manager." "Manager, partner, we can work out the details," Mr. Garrett said with a wave of his hand. "The important thing is this place needs you, Ethan, and I think you need it too." Ethan thought of the small cottage that had been his and Emma's, of her grave beneath the aspen tree, of all the memories both painful and precious that were embedded in this land. "Yes," he said finally. "I'd be honored, Gerald." That decision marked another turning point in Ethan's gradual healing. The increased responsibilities kept his mind engaged, while the sense of building something lasting gave purpose to his days. He expanded the double bars operations, introducing new breeding stock and modernizing methods, while maintaining the traditions that had made the ranch successful. In the spring of the 3rd year after Emma's death, Ethan hired a new schoolteacher for the small school the Garretts had established for the children of ranch employees. Grace Wilson was a quiet, serious young woman from Denver, with intelligent eyes and a gentle manner that reminded Ethan not at all of Emma, which was perhaps why he found himself able to talk with her, without the constant ache of comparison. They developed a friendship, based initially on shared literary interests. Grace had been astonished to discover Whitman's Leaves of Grass among the books in Ethan's cottage. Their discussions of poetry and literature gradually expanded to include personal histories and philosophies, comfortable conversations that stretched long into the evening. By the time autumn painted the aspens gold again, Ethan recognized that his feelings for Grace had deepened into something more than friendship. The realization brought both joy and guilt: joy at the unexpected gift of new affection, guilt at what felt momentarily like betrayal of Emma's memory. On the anniversary of Emma's death, Ethan rode as always to her grave, now marked by an aspen tree that had grown remarkably in 4 years. He sat beside the simple headstone, the wooden columbine long since replaced with a series of carved flowers, each marking another year of remembrance. "I think I'm falling in love again, Emma," he said aloud, the admission both difficult and freeing. "Her name is Grace. She's nothing like you, and yet I think you would approve of her. She's kind and intelligent with a quiet strength that reminds me of yours." The wind rustled through the aspen leaves, a soothing sound that had come to feel like Emma's response in these one-sided conversations. "I'm keeping my promise," Ethan continued. "Not because I love you any less, but because you taught me that love isn't something finite. It grows and changes and finds new expressions." He touched the headstone gently. "You'll always be part of me, Emma, always." That evening, when Grace came to the cottage for their regular literary discussion, Ethan told her about Emma, not just the fact of his previous marriage, which she already knew, but the full story from that first meeting outside Snake River to their final moments together. Grace listened without interruption, her eyes compassionate but not pitying. When he finished, she reached across the table to take his hand. "Thank you for trusting me with her story," she said simply. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Ethan agreed. "And she made me promise to live fully after she was gone, to find happiness again." He looked directly into Grace's eyes, his own clear and certain. "I'd like to keep that promise, Grace, with you if you're willing. Grace's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "I would be honored, Ethan James." They were married the following spring in a ceremony as simple and heartfelt as Ethan's first wedding had been. Mr. Garrett once again stood as Ethan's best man, while Mrs. Garrett wept happy tears for the young man she had come to love as a son. Grace moved into the cottage that had been Emma's home, bringing her own touches while respecting the memories it held. She never asked Ethan to remove Emma's piano or the small photograph that still sat on his bedside table, understanding that these weren't barriers to their marriage, but parts of the complex, loving man she had chosen. Life at the Double Bar continued to flourish under Ethan's management. The ranch expanded, adding new pastures and modern facilities while maintaining the traditions that had made it successful. 2 years after their marriage, Grace gave birth to a son they named Thomas Gerald James, a robust boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's thoughtful expression. On the day of Thomas's christening, Ethan took his infant son to visit Emma's grave. The aspen tree had grown tall and strong, its leaves whispering in the Wyoming breeze. "I kept my promise, Emma," Ethan said softly, cradling his son. "I found happiness again, just as you wanted. And I want you to know that you're still part of me, part of what I teach this boy about courage and love and finding joy in the time we're given." As if in response, a sudden gust of wind sent aspen leaves dancing around them, golden light filtering through the branches to touch the child's face. Ethan smiled, a man at peace with his past and embracing his future. "The town turned you away for being sick," he whispered, the words that had changed both their lives. "And I stayed outside with you, best decision I ever made." Thomas gurgled in his arms, reaching for the dancing leaves. Ethan held him up to better see the sunlight through the branches. This new life connected to a love that had not ended with death, but had transformed and continued, as enduring as the Wyoming landscape that had witnessed it all. And in that moment, on that peaceful hillside where past and future met, Ethan James knew that some loves never truly end, they simply change form, like the seasons, each bringing its own beauty and purpose to a life fully lived.